Boa noite a todos. É um prazer para o IAB estar recebendo aqui vocês essa noite de segunda-feira para a gente debater um tema que eu acho que é super importante para as nossas cidades, né? Que é a questão do projeto, do planejamento e da participação, né? Dos usuários, né? Da população. E como acho que o Rio de Janeiro tem uma expertise grande nessa área, desenvolvido em vários projetos de urbanização de favela e em outras ocasiões. Está aqui o Toledo, que é um arquiteto que tem uma certa experiência bastante importante nisso, né? Enfim, e hoje a gente traz uma experiência que é uma experiência que está muito instalada também, assim, que é a experiência americana, né? Desde a década de 60, com aqueles livros do Christopher Alexander, nos Estados Unidos, que essa é uma tradição da forma de projetar americana bastante instalada no país, e acho que é importante a gente trocar essas experiências. A dinâmica do encontro aqui hoje vai ser um pouco... A gente vai ter uma mesa rápida, que eu vou convocar agora. Queria chamar o Luiz Fernando Valverde, vice-presidente do Conselho de Arquitetura e Urbanismo do Rio de Janeiro. Peço uma salva de palmas para ele. O Antônio Augusto Veríssimo, que está representando o IPP, o Instituto de Planejamento do município, e o cônsul geral James Story. Peço também uma salva de palmas para eles. E depois a gente vai chamar as pessoas que vão fazer o debate mesmo, e eu vou procurar fazer a mediação desse debate. Enfim, sem mais delongas, eu passo a palavra aqui para o Valverde.
Boa noite a todos. Agradeço aqui o convite do Pedro para compor a mesa. Para o CAL, Conselho de Arquitetura e Urbanismo do Rio de Janeiro, é uma oportunidade importante de estar aqui debatendo esse tema. Acho que todos sabem que o CAL se colocou como missão e grande objetivo: arquitetura e urbanismo para todos. É um grande desafio que nós temos, e acredito que o evento hoje, né, seja mais uma contribuição para esse debate que temos travado dentro do Conselho, nas escolas de arquitetura e urbanismo, e essa parceria com o IAB, que ela se estenderá por vários anos, especificamente em função da realização do Congresso de 2020, né? O CAL está bastante integrado com o IAB nessa preparação. A parceria agora, especificamente para esse evento, com o Instituto Americano de Arquitetos e com a intermediação do Consulado Americano, foi muito importante. Então, saúdo esse evento, que seja uma ótima palestra para todos, um bom debate, e obrigado e bem-vindos nossos convidados aqui dos Estados Unidos da América.
Sequência. Boa noite a todos. Eu queria...
Antônio Augusto Veríssimo.
Eu queria inicialmente justificar a ausência aqui da presidente do IPP, a doutora Eduarda Larroque, em função de que houve uma mudança de horário num evento da Prefeitura. Hoje está sendo lançado o plano estratégico, né, nova versão do plano estratégico, e houve uma superposição de agendas, então impossibilitou a presença dela aqui. Mas, em nome do Instituto, eu quero agradecer muito ao Consulado dos Estados Unidos por possibilitar a vinda desses dois representantes do Instituto de Arquitetos dos que é o senhor Joey Mills e o Wayne Fagan, e dizer que o Instituto Pereira Passos tem e agradecer também o IAB, né, que é parceiro nesse evento, na organização dessa vinda aqui junto com o Instituto Pereira Passos, e dizer que o Instituto Pereira Passos tem um interesse especial em conhecer essa experiência norte-americana em função de um projeto que está sendo incubado dentro do Instituto, que é um projeto de desenvolvimento para a maré, que nós já vemos já há alguns meses promovendo reuniões, trazendo especialistas. Nós tivemos aqui o Jorge Fiore, tivemos aqui com o arquiteto mexicano. São pessoas fabulosas, que são pessoas que têm vindo trazer suas experiências, trazer suas contribuições, e que nós pretendemos, com essa troca de experiência, com esse aprendizado, moldar uma metodologia adequada para trabalhar uma área complexa como é o bairro da Maré. Então esse é um trabalho que tem um duplo sentido, né? Primeiro, reforçar essa parceria com o consulado, divulgar esse trabalho dos colegas dos Estados Unidos, mas também consolidar, trabalhar, avançar na consolidação de uma metodologia que nos permita propor uma abordagem para a maré que seja adequada ao desafio que uma localidade como aquela impõe para nós como planejadores, como arquitetos. Então, eu queria anunciar que esse evento de hoje é um evento aberto ao público, mas nós teremos também um evento amanhã, no Instituto Pereira Passos, pela manhã, com alguns convidados, e vamos então fazer uma discussão mais aprofundada sobre essa metodologia e também apresentar a nossa experiência. Então nós vamos ter, por exemplo, Toledo fazendo uma apresentação sobre a experiência que ele teve na Rocinha. Vamos ter colegas da Prefeitura que também tiveram experiências em metodologia de planejamento participativo, no sentido de a gente aprimorar os nossos conhecimentos e tentar criar uma metodologia própria adequada para áreas complexas como que nós temos aqui na cidade de Rio. Infelizmente, esse segundo evento de amanhã já está com a lista fechada, eu não posso ampliar, mas eu acho que hoje nós já vamos ter aqui um painel bastante interessante, bastante amplo, do que é essa experiência de mais de 50 anos que é desenvolvida pelo Instituto de Arquitetos norte-americanos. Obrigado, doutor.
Obrigado, doutor Augusto. Bom, passo a palavra então para o cônsul-geral James Story.
Obrigado a todos. Boa noite ou boa tarde? Onde que estamos? Tarde ou noite? Noite já, né? Boa noite a todas e a todos. E como bom cônsul-geral, com a equipe que ainda não confia muito nele, sou satisfeito que tem alguma coisa que é escrita, que eu vou ler para evitar um problema. Eu posso facilmente sair da cena, né? Mas realmente é uma honra estar aqui com vocês hoje de noite. Gostaria de agradecer a nossa anfitrião desta noite, o presidente do Instituto de Arquitetos do Brasil, o Pedro de Luz Moreira. Também gostaria de dar as boas-vindas ao presidente do Instituto Pereira Passos, Eduardo Larocque, quem não está aqui hoje à noite, mas vamos encontrar ela amanhã, eu acho, né? E a senhora Júnia Santa Rosa, diretora do Ministério das Cidades, secretária nacional da Habitação. E, claro, um grande obrigado aos membros respeitados da IPP, IAB, AIA e a todos que estão participando essa noite. Espero que as discussões... Me entende em português? Está saindo? Tá, beleza. Mas espero que as discussões de hoje sejam interessantes e produtivas. Empresas de arquitetura e engenharia do Brasil e dos Estados Unidos já colaboram há algum tempo, particularmente em áreas como desenvolvimento residencial e comercial. Sobretudo, eu acho Barra do Tijuca comercial, né? Mas muitas vezes, muitos projetos focados na comunidade que têm sido desenvolvidos nas áreas carentes ficam no esquecimento. Habitação a preços acessíveis, revitalização comercial, econômica, os novos parques, a preservação do espaço aberto e marcos históricos são apenas alguns exemplos. Se eu posso também abrir um espaço aqui, falar um pouquinho do coração. Eu passei a semana passada com Judith Human, nossa assessora internacional para direitos para pessoas com deficiência. Eu diria também, deveríamos destacar que deveríamos pensar das necessidades das pessoas com deficiências, que tenham neles as oportunidades de entrar em qualquer prédio, qualquer comércio, qualquer escola. Esse também faz parte do trabalho que deveríamos pensar e fazer. Judith Human realmente é uma fenômena, aquela questão. E realmente quero destacar o trabalho que faz a ANDEF e outros órgãos aqui no Rio de Janeiro. Mas, além disso, o crescimento vejaria, eu sempre saio da cena, né? O crescimento e desenvolvimento das comunidades do Rio de Janeiro de uma forma sustentável e eco-amigável é um objetivo dividido por todos. Um planejamento abrangente para gerenciar o crescimento e garantir o desenvolvimento adequado e bem coordenado é essencial para todas as cidades. Os padrões únicos de geografia e de crescimento do Rio são especialmente desafiadores. E fortes parcerias públicos-privados são essenciais na cidade maravilhosamente diversificada. Cidade maravilhosa, indeed. Essas parcerias não são possíveis sem organizações como a AIA e a IPP trabalhando juntas em direção a um objetivo comum. Programas como a capacitação das comunidades através do projeto da Cidade Democrática, Pacto de IPP do Rio e o Programa de Assistência Regional e Urbana de Design de AIA têm trazido e continuarão trazendo crescimento e oportunidades para as nossas comunidades. Espero que continuem a expandir o alcance desses programas e continuem ajudando nossas comunidades a enfrentar desafios urbanos complexos. Obrigado mais uma vez, tudo de melhor para as discussões de hoje e à noite e os futuros empreendimentos. Obrigado.
Obrigado, James. Acho que então, sem mais delongas, eu peço que vou compor a mesa seguinte, e aí eu gostaria de chamar o diretor da AIA, American Institute of Architects, Joel Mills. Peço uma salva de palmas para ele. A diretora da American Institute of Architects, Erin Simons. Peço também uma salva de palmas. E por último, o secretário de Planejamento Urbano de Northampton, Massachusetts, Wayne Feynman. Ok.
I can't remember if it was boa noite or boa tarde. Noite. I'll just start with a thank you and an apology. Thank you to our wonderful host tonight, for the fabulous facility, and for all of you that have come out to have a dissuade folks when we travel that anything in America has all the answers. Both from a process standpoint, we have lots of issues in the United States. You may be aware we have lots of issues with democratic participation in our cities as well. And we certainly have lots of urban issues that are not unlike the ones that you guys face here. So when we've had some conversations, we were in Sao Paulo for a couple days last week, when we had conversations there about the scope and scale of issues that they're working on as a community. I didn't hear anything that we haven't seen in some of our cities in America as well. The conversation here is often focused on the favelas and the need to bring everyone into economic development. We have populations in some of our cities. Los Angeles, which is our second largest municipality, has a neighborhood that has 12,000 people who live on the street who are homeless. So we have the same kinds of scale in certain places. We face, and this is something that we see wherever we travel, we see the same kinds of large issues that we're all dealing with, particularly in our cities, and they relate to the growth of global population, the growth of our cities, the accompanying housing crisis that comes with it. In the United States right now, every single county, which are local jurisdictions, every single county in America has an affordable housing crisis right now. There's not enough supply of housing at an affordable level to meet all of the needs. And so it's a big problem. We see this issue everywhere that we work. Inequality is rising dramatically, which is a global issue and is an issue in all of our communities, wherever we may be, where the rich are gaining more and more wealth, and particularly at the bottom income levels, we're losing upward mobility. So it's a major issue in our cities. And then we have this issue of climate change, which is forcing us to think in new and different and creative ways as it affects us. And we've heard about some of the water issues that you face here. We're having historic droughts in the western part of our country, where there's been restrictions in place, and so far there hasn't been relief yet. They haven't had rain, and they're dealing with massive historic fires as a result of it. So those are issues that we're going to continue to need to be very innovative in our cities to address. And then finally, the crisis of governance. I noticed this weekend there's actually a website now that just tracks urban protests around the world, because there's so many of them that we can't even keep up with them anymore. Because the local governments and public sector have less and less resources than ever before, and public expectations are getting higher and higher. So there's frustration, and particularly when things aren't going well, the conversation about government is a negative one. And we just happen to leave our country where we're beginning a presidential campaign, and it's a story right now in the news is all about which candidates are the most popular early in the race and how well public opinion polls reflect on their candidacies. But we had a poll just a month ago that asked citizens to rate favorability between these candidates and some fictional villain characters from movies. So there's a movie called Jaws that features a shark that attacks and eats human beings. That shark was more popular than any of our candidates for president. There's the Star Wars movie, which has the Darth Vader villain. Darth Vader was much more popular than any of the candidates. So it was interesting to come here and be here on Saturday and see the conversation that you're having right now about governance as well. We saw our hotel is in Copacabana. We saw the protest, and the news coverage is international immediately. And so, obviously there's the reality of an economic crisis here and what to do about it, and then there's the reality of the future each of our cities, and you're hosting an international event in a year that is driving a lot of additional change that other cities don't face. So it's a really interesting time to be here. So what you're going to hear about tonight is a program that the American Institute of Architects has had for 50 years now, that has been mainly focused in the United States. Cities apply for assistance of all kinds of things, and then you'll hear details about how we work with them. But it's been responsible for some of the iconic, famous places in America today, and it's all driven by involving the citizens of that place in the solutions. Because when we go to communities, we always hear the same thing. As professionals, we like to build plans for cities. And we like to start on Monday with our transportation plan, and on Tuesday maybe we'll talk about economic development, on Wednesday it's housing. And that's not how citizens plan or think. And so when we go to communities, they say, please don't build us another plan. We don't want any more plans. We have plenty of plans. They all sit on the shelves back there. We need help implementing strategies. And so the focus of what we do is work with communities to change the conversation about community development. Most of the communities that we go to, they're thinking urban transformation is such a overwhelming task. So we have to have a project as big as that task that we can implement to achieve it. And so the image that I always think of is someone trying to push a boulder up a mountain, right? It's something that requires a lot of funds and takes a long time. And often what happens is you don't build momentum. And so midway through, maybe you have an economic crisis, something happens, and that plan never gets implemented. And so the result, frustration builds, you don't build momentum to the community. So we like to reverse that process in what we call snowball effect, which is, if you're on a mountain with snow, you can create a snowball and roll it down the hill, and it picks up more snow as it goes, right? So it's bigger, bigger, bigger. So it's all about having a catalyst that builds momentum for partnership, for participation from the whole community in creating the city of the future that they aspire to. So I'm going to turn the mic over to my colleague Eric Simmons, who's going to describe the program, and then Wayne, who's been a team leader, is going to talk about his experiences, as well as Risa.
Hello, I'm just going to try and give you sort of a quick snapshot of what it is that we mean when we talk about this program. So the program that Joel and I work on is called the Design Systems Team Program. And it is a public service of the American Institute of Architects. So it's not something that we charge money for. There's no revenue that comes out of this program. It very much is a public service. The AIA began it, some of our members began it about 50 years. It's kept up almost continuously during that 50-year period. And actually next year we're going to be celebrating that anniversary, even though we haven't quite figured out what it is that we were doing to celebrate it. But the whole point of it, the whole crux of the program is, apparently we're coming to Rio to celebrate the 50th anniversary of an American program. The whole point of it is we put together multidisciplinary teams of volunteer experts, and we bring those teams to communities across the United States to work with the people who actually live in those communities, to ultimately come up with a vision and an idea of what that community could become in the years to follow, whether that's the next year, 5 years from there, 10 years from now, 30 years from now. And so the program itself is really based on 3 major principles. The first one is the idea of objectivity. Again, we don't make any money off of this program. We don't charge any money for this program. And the folks who work on teams with us, they don't charge a dime. We don't pay them. They're all volunteers. Not only are they not being paid for their time and their expertise, they usually aren't from the community that we're going to. And in some occurrences, they've never even been to that community before. And the idea of that is that we're going into it with very, very clear eyes. We have no preconceived biases. We have no ideas as to what that community should be. We're trying to be as open-minded as possible so that we can listen to the folks who live there and really come up with recommendations that reflect what they want. The team members that we work with, not only are they not paid, they also promise not to develop any business from our project. So there's never an instance of us having a team member who goes to a community and, says, you really need some sort of transportation plan. By the way, my firm does really great transportation plans. You should totally hire me when this is all done. So we're going in there without any biases. And because of that, we can earn the trust of the community. They don't think that we're there with any sort of ulterior motives. The second idea is the idea of multidisciplinary expertise. Obviously, this is a program from the American Institute of Architects. It is a fairly natural assumption that that probably means we're bringing teams of architects. We are not. We usually have one architect on the team. Often they're a team leader, but often they're also just an urban designer who are working with everyone else. And we don't have any preconceived ideas as to what each team is going to be. So every single team that we put together is completely tailored to the community. So while we designate a team leader very early on the process, we don't put the rest of the team together until we've actually visited that community and spoken with people who live there. And then we go back and we say, well, they clearly have transportation issues, so we need to have a transportation engineer. And they clearly have historic preservation issues, so we need to have someone who can do that. So every single one of our teams is completely customized and is very, very broadly multidisciplinary. The last and probably most important principle of our program is the idea of public participation. Again, we're objective and we're outsiders. We are very cognizant of the fact that the people who are actually experts in a community are the people who actually live there. And so we might be bringing folks who have a great deal of expertise in their subject matter. They are not the experts in the communities that we work on. So it is very, very important for us to get as many people in the community involved as possible. And to that end, we have a variety of different methods to get them engaged. We have a variety of different meetings that we use to get people engaged and to get people to participate. And so just to kind of give you a quick view of what one of these looks like, we usually bring the team to town for anywhere from 3 to 5 days. So we're there for a very short amount of time. And because of that, we have to work very, very quickly and very, very efficiently. So when the team gets there, the first thing we'll do is we'll take a tour of the community to look around, get a physical sense and a physical context of what we're going to be dealing with. We then quickly move into meetings, and we call those meetings stakeholder meetings. Typically, they're with people who have a specialized knowledge about the issues that we're going to be looking at. They might be city staff, they might be people who work with nonprofits. They're people who really know the issues and have a lot of the information that we're going to need in order to become informed on the community. And then at the end of that first day, most importantly, we have a big, what we call a town hall meeting. It's a public meeting. Everyone in the community is invited. We tell the host communities to get as many people at that meeting as possible, so it's publicized for months in advance of that meeting. And we found in the 50-odd years that we've been doing this almost, that any given project is only as successful as that meeting really is. It's only as successful as the number of people that you have and as great as the public participation is. And so that last meeting is very, very important on that day because that's our chance to just speak with everyone and sort of get an idea as to what it is that they don't like about their community, but more importantly, what is it that they love about their community and where do they see their community going, and what are the things that need to happen in order to make that community an even greater place than it already is. After the end of that very, very full first day, we then sort of start moving into the team recommendation building. And that's when our team members work with local professionals, so architecture students, architects who might be in the community, landscape architects, design professionals, and we work very, very closely with them to start formulating recommendations and ideas, and more importantly, implementation steps that will back up those recommendations. Because as Joel said, the very last thing we want to do is go to the community and leave them with another glossy, pretty plan that just sits on the shelf and collects dust, because there's no idea as to how to get to those steps, how to actually implement the recommendations. So all of our recommendations, they tend to be phased, so we have things that the community can literally do the day after the team leaves, things that don't require any money, no resources. They don't require the city to necessarily do something. It's the citizens can go out and do it, and they can use the success from those very visible actions to start building the things that maybe take a little bit longer. Maybe they take 6 months, maybe they take a year, and then just kind of keep on catalyzing those successes so that you can ultimately reach that larger end goal. So our team members will work with the local professionals for several days, coming up with those recommendations, generating graphics, drawings, maps, etc., to help illustrate those recommendations. And then ultimately, the whole visit culminates in another public meeting. And again, we try to get the community to get as excited about that public meeting as possible. It's open to everyone, the doors are completely open. We want as many people to come and get as excited as possible. And that's where the team presents our vision back to the community. And our vision is usually a reflection of the things that people have been telling us during the time that we're there. So it's really a reflection of their vision. And again, we try to give them those recommendations and those steps and some easily implementable things that will help them build success. With the ultimate goal, even though, again, we're only there for 3 to 5 days, we're obviously not going to come up with something that's incredibly complex and incredibly detailed. But this is really the first step in a much, much longer series of steps. And if they do their work correctly, they can catalyze those 3 to 5 days and start building something much bigger. And so that's sort of the overall process of what we do. I'm going to turn it over to Wayne so he can tell you a little bit about some of the projects that he's worked on, and more specifically the town that he lives in, and his experience with the DAP program.
Thank you.
Thank you. I want to start by talking about planning in the context of the United States, and then sort of talk in a little more detail. First, so you know, I'm a planner in a very small city. So my city is 30,000 people, smaller, I'm sure, than most neighborhoods in Rio. I have connection with a lot of different aspects of American practice, planning practice. So I sort of experience around the country. So just quickly, my title is Director of Planning and Sustainability for Northampton. In the United States, planning is really a different discipline from architecture. So I'm a planner, not an architect, but there's a lot of collaborations and work very closely with architects. I also teach at 25% teaching position at a local university. I'm on a couple nationwide boards for sustainability panels. I do college accreditations for planning programs. I'm very interested in sort of what's the next generation of planners and to some extent architects. And then, as Aaron mentioned, I've been on a lot. I've been on 23, 24 of the AIA panel. So I sort of have a sense of what's out there. So a little background on the way I got involved, which tells a little bit of story, I think, about how the program works. 8 or 10 years ago, Northampton decided that we wanted to write a new comprehensive plan that was really going to be focused on sustainability. We wanted to sort of change the way the community was. And we've sort of always had, this isn't new to the most recent comprehensive plan, we had really 2 guiding principles. One is we want to engage the community and get the community involved with every single planning process that we do. And we're always looking at creative ways to do that. Everything from what's in the United States, very traditional public hearings, to interesting workshops, to tours. You know, next year we're planning a open house for Northampton to give people tours of odd places, and they think we're doing it because we want to give them a chance to see it. We're doing it as one more opportunity to engage the culture. So when we decided to write our comprehensive plan, we knew that we wanted to figure out a way how to engage the community as broadly and as deeply as possible. How do we start with the goal of saying sustainability has to drive everything that we do? So we asked AIA to send a team to us to help us do the process. And we did it for a few reasons. One is we do a lot of planning processes that's done by staff or by local consultants. We thought it was important to have a team that was from out of the region, from people who weren't part of the story in Northampton. And each two projects are different what the goal was. For us, it was really to restart the conversation. Some communities are very much in the weeds and want specific recommendations. That wasn't what we were trying to do. We really just wanted to get a community conversation developed. One thing that we say is the way you tell the difference between what communities are sustainable and what aren't is sneak into a lot of people's homes for a Saturday night dinner. And if the conversation is about sustainability, then the community's probably doing the sustainable things. If the conversation is not about that, then they're not. And so we wanted to set that conversation to get going in the process. The other thing for us is comprehensive plans are, I'm trained as a planner, I think comprehensive plans are incredibly important for communities. But they are a long, slow, boring process, and it's really hard to engage the community for a long time. our experience is when we do a comprehensive plan, we get a lot of public, when we do a comprehensive plan, we get a lot of public input early in the process, but the people who remain engaged throughout the entire process tend to be the wealthier, more educated people who can come to 10 different public meetings. And so it was really important for us to start with a more strategic focus, because the benefit of this 3 to 5 day process is that's doable for a lot of people. You know, people with kids, people who are working, and so we began with, for us, it was a 3 day process. We began with a 3 day process. We had a lot of members of the community involved. Even the members who weren't probably had a friend who went there and heard about it. It was a test for us as our governance structure as we have a mayor and city council. And for about a year and a half or 2 years after we did this process, it would be the councilors who come to a meeting and say, well, what did I hear in that AIA process? And so it became sort of a lens for the whole board. We then did a comprehensive plan, and to that point people forgot about the AIA process, but the comprehensive plan was built on those principles. People who just participated in the 3 day process would have seen the work that they did reflected in the final plan. And then obviously a lot of other things were in the plan as well, the plan went into a lot more details. But that really helped us sort of set the stage going forward. And you can guess, because we were involved with the community process, I'm not someone who claims it's all fun. You know, I've been in a lot of really brutal public meetings. And so it's not necessarily all, you know, this wonderful process. But it's really what gives us the mandate. So we go through that process. Sometimes it's incredibly friendly, and sometimes it's less friendly. But at the end of the process, we build a consensus, and that consensus is what lets us go forward. And so I like the process so much that I ended up volunteering. As I say, I've been on 23, 24 teams. And I've seen it in all the communities I've been in that the process is very successful. Because it engages community. And you know, one of the prerequisites is some communities don't have an engaged group that's sort of willing to help make the process successful. And then it's not successful. You know, an outside team coming into the community, if nobody shows up at public meetings, doesn't really help the community. It's not just a consultant-driven model. It really needs that engagement. But of the 24 I've done, probably, I don't know, 2/3 of them had engaged political support and community members that have all been incredible.
Obrigado, Wayne. Meu papel aqui hoje é tentar fazer um resumo, então destacar algumas das questões que foram colocadas pelas pessoas que fizeram as apresentações aqui. E acho que a gente teve um painel assim, bastante interessante, que acho que é importante a gente começar a pensar, e acho que é uma questão para todos nós refletirmos, né? O papel da AIA como um paralelo, vamos dizer assim, com o Instituto dos Arquitetos do Brasil, né? A AIA é também uma organização da sociedade civil, portanto, não tem apoio governamental e é bancada, né, mantida pelos arquitetos que estão filiados. A gente teve um encontro recentemente com um grupo de arquitetos do RIBA, que é essa mesma tradição anglo-saxônica, né, que é o Royal Institute of British Architecture, e que vem dessa mesma tradição de empoderamento da sociedade civil, que é bem diferente, né, Brasil e esse mundo anglo-saxão. Acho que isso nós não queremos aqui fazer importações mecânicas nem nada, nem estou fazendo nenhum juízo de valor, mas acho que é importante a gente contextualizar isso. Há uma tradição, né, de muito respeito pela sociedade civil, pelas organizações da sociedade civil no mundo anglo-saxão, diferentemente da tradição ibérica, patrimonialista, a qual, para o bem ou para o mal, estamos nós filiados, né? E eu acho que essa que é a primeira provocação, né, que E esse é um programa que está estabelecido na EAA, segundo a informação do Joe Mills, há 50 anos. Tá? E os arquitetos são voluntários desse programa, pelo que eu entendi. Tá? E eu achei muito interessante uma fala que o Joey colocou da ansiedade, né, pela apresentação do plano e pela transformação e pelas implementações, por uma certa ansiedade pela viabilização efetiva das transformações. Acho que isso é uma coisa que todas as nossas sociedades no mundo todo vivem, essa ansiedade, querem essas transformações, mas ao mesmo tempo nós reconhecemos que esse processo de construção, e no Brasil principalmente, o IAB vem defendendo fortemente, que é preciso, quer dizer, se dar mais tempo a projeto e plano, porque senão as implementações acabam saindo muito ruins. Recentemente nós temos experiências como a Petrobras, o Petrolão, e mostram que a nossa sociedade não empodera as ações de projeto e de planejamento, e que acho que isso é muito importante, né, que passa a ser empoderado aqui. Há um folclore na categoria, que eu não sei nem se é verdade, mas posso checar com meus colegas aqui, de que o Empire State Building demorou 9 anos para ser projetado e apenas 9 meses para ser construído. Não sei se é verdade, mas enfim. Por outro lado, quer dizer, a Ellen Simmons também detalhou muito a questão, e acho que ela toca numa questão que eu acho que é muito importante, né? A questão da multidisciplinariedade do planejamento. A questão de que os voluntários que se engajam nesse programa da AIA são voluntários e são de uma determinada região. Acho que isso é uma questão também bastante importante, né, de que a arquitetura, né, e o espaço físico construído pelo homem tem uma vinculação muito forte, e num país com a dimensão continental dos Estados Unidos, assim como o nosso país também, essa vinculação entre, né, arquiteto e cidade, arquiteto e regiões do país é um tema de reflexão bastante importante. Ela menciona também o que ela chamou de Formulation Recommendation, que seriam como, talvez, me lembro dos princípios do Christopher Alexander, não sei se seriam os patterns, né, do tempo do Christopher Alexander, que eram como os princípios gerais que uma comunidade que não desenha seu próprio espaço transmite para os arquitetos, para que eles tenham aqueles princípios como se eu entendi a tua colocação. Acho que esse é um ponto também interessante da gente discutir aqui. E por último, o Wayne, né, acho que ele coloca uma questão da pequena escala, das small cities, engajar, o termo de engajar as comunidades, de efetivamente ter uma participação, mas há uma questão também da qualidade da participação, que eu acho que é muito importante. Uma questão, né, do longo processo que inviabiliza a participação mais pulverizada, e que os processos mais curtos de planejamento fomentam uma participação mais intensa, é bastante interessante. A construção do consenso, que hoje em dia acho que me parece uma coisa bastante difícil, né? Nas várias, né, temas que nós já nos engajamos em planejamento, né? E aqui acho que é bastante complicado. E o comprometimento, né, dos grupos participativos, de participação em todas as etapas e no acompanhamento. Eu acho que é importante agora a gente abrir para a participação de todos vocês, e aí queria ver se tem alguém interessado em fazer pergunta. Eu mesmo posso começar a colocar aqui o Wayne, por exemplo, quando ele fala da questão de pessoas que são estrangeiras à região. Achei uma coisa interessante, né? Quer dizer, uma pessoa que é de fora e que muitas vezes percebe com mais acuidade, com mais melhor, né, as aspirações e os desejos que estão colocados naquele planejamento. Então, esse olhar de fora, acho que é muito interessante, foi interessante o que você colocou, né?
So, from my standpoint, it's not that the outside perspective is the right thing for each project. It's, for us, what I see this AIA process being very effective is really two different things. One is to challenge us to think about the paradox, to challenge us to think differently about what we're doing. So, if you're in the United States in the 1950s and 60s and 70s, we didn't build sidewalks, we didn't build bicycle accommodations, we just sort of figured cars were going to take over the universe. And communities in the United States are still going through a paradigm shift. My community started probably 30 years ago. There's many communities in the United States who haven't yet started that. So, my paradigm shift at times good for outsiders to be able to hold up a mirror to us that locals can't necessarily see. The other thing for me that the outsiders bring to the table is, meeting with a group for 3 days and getting a chance to really understand what they're saying. Sometimes if you're in a community for too long, you know what everyone's saying before you get there. And so at times actually it's hard to listen to what people are saying. And so the outsiders coming sometimes will listen to our community better than we can. And from a political level, they haven't been involved in the local battles. I've worked with the same community for most of my career. And so I go to public meetings and people adore me because I built bicycle paths all over town, and they don't like me because we dramatically densify what we allow for development close to downtown. And so I go to a meeting and I have people who love me and hate me, but an outsider sort of comes with a clean slate. So I think the outsiders are really important for that perspective. AI then leads at the end of 3 to 4 days, and then it's back to the local community to go to the next step. So I think at that point you need local people. You need people who know what's going on, or engage in the conversation for the weeks, months, and years to follow. So it's not that local is important, it's that the other step is a useful first step.
Obrigado. Ansou.
Boa noite. Eu gostaria de saber se é feita alguma avaliação de impacto depois, porque eles mencionaram que tem 3 a 5 dias, né? E se existe um acompanhamento depois, mesmo que não seja feito pelo programa, se há um empoderamento das pessoas da comunidade para que eles façam esse acompanhamento. Porque um problema muito sério em comunidade é entrar, sair e fazer uma espécie de um burburinho, mas não ter mudanças efetivas, né? Continuidade do trabalho. Obrigado.
Pelo que eu entendi, trata-se de um programa de ação voluntária, tanto por parte dos profissionais quanto por parte da comunidade. E entendi também que não há participação do poder público nesse programa, ou seja, as administrações municipais, não existe dinheiro público nisso, certo? Bom, nesse sentido, esse grupo vai lá, tem uma interação com a comunidade, levanta problemas e propõe algumas ações. Agora, como se dá o financiamento das obras? Ou seja, você deu exemplo aí de uma ciclovia que foi proposta e foi construída lá numa determinada cidade. Quem pagou essa obra? Qual é a fonte dos recursos para a execução das obras que são propostas por esses esse grupo de planejamento comunitário.
Obrigado. Any more question? Vera.
Boa noite. Gostaria de entender um pouquinho o conceito de comunidade, porque é um conceito um tanto abstrato, somente numa metrópole, onde você tem diversas, milhares de comunidades dentro da mesma cidade. E, se possível, exemplificar o tamanho das ações, quer dizer, o tamanho das comunidades que eles fizeram ações que foram bem-sucedidas. Tornar mais concreta essa visão.
A Vera Tanger.
Boa noite. Eu queria
Eu diria para as pessoas, eu não pedi, foi erro meu, que elas se apresentassem, dissessem seu nome para contextualizar. Desculpe aí.
Vera Tanger, sou da FAO, da UFRJ, professora da Faculdade de Arquitetura e Urbanismo da UFRJ. Eu queria falar em duas direções. A primeira é explicar um pouquinho a formação do planejador nos Estados Unidos. É muito distinto do que temos aqui. A nossa graduação, uma graduação conjunta de arquitetura, paisagismo, urbanismo. Nós não temos essa distinção nos nossos cursos. Então, eu queria que você destacasse um pouco a formação do planner, né, nos Estados Unidos. Qual é essa formação? Como é que é composta? Que perfil é esse profissional? Que, na verdade, o que eu entendo é sempre... está sempre, ou pelo menos grande parte das vezes, à frente desse processo. E o segundo, a pergunta seria explicar um pouco mais o tempo. O workshop é de 3 a 4 dias, ou 3 a 5 dias, mas eu entendi que o processo vai de 1 ano e meio a 2 anos, que é normalmente um processo, de fato, um tempo, de fato, de um processo participativo sério. Mais ou menos essa é a previsão da duração de um processo desse. Então, eu queria que você destacasse essas duas, enfim, respondendo essas duas direções.
Mais uma ali, depois a gente passa para a mesa fazer alguns comentários desse grupo de perguntas.
Boa noite, meu nome é Luiz Gustavo, eu sou da ABCP, Associação Brasileira de Cimento Portland, atuando lá como arquiteto urbanista aqui na Regional Rio de Janeiro. Nós da ABCP, aqui no Rio de Janeiro, nós temos uma ferramenta que se denomina Chart Meeting e que a gente faz, é bem isso que vocês fazem. A minha dúvida para vocês é se essas propostas são a nível de muitos anos para frente, como um planejamento para 30 anos. É lógico que dentro de uma reunião como essa, algumas ações podem ser mais rápidas e outras podem levar muito mais tempo para se concretizar. Mas nós fazemos essa ferramenta aqui no Rio de Janeiro, já no estado do Rio, já em 5 cidades, onde a gente projeta os projetos numa participação colaborativa com a sociedade, poder público, universidades. A gente coloca todo mundo junto para discutir a cidade, o futuro da cidade, do bairro, e a gente tem tido resultados excelentes, né? Dentro de uma ferramenta dessa, a gente consegue extrair propostas de mais ou menos 80 projetos por cada atividade como essa nas cidades. Mas a minha dúvida é que nós planejamos e incentivamos a sociedade local a projetar a sua cidade para o futuro, né, envolvendo também as indústrias situadas nessas cidades. Mas a minha dúvida é saber se essa atividade que vocês fazem é mais a curto prazo ou se também tem projetos a longo prazo.
Obrigado, Luiz Gustavo. Passo então quem gostaria de responder. Acho que tem.
I'll go ahead and take the first question about follow-up, because that was an excellent point. We don't have a formalized structure for our follow-up. We do a lot of projects, and so we found that putting a single idea, this is what follow-up is going to be, does not work. It doesn't consider the unique constraints of each project. But we stay in touch with every single one of the projects that we work with. We tend to joke with them. Yes, we're leaving, we've come to town, we've spent 3 very, very intense days. We're going to drop a whole lot of information on you and then flee, but we're not changing our email addresses and we're not changing our phone numbers. And so a typical model will involve the community and the community leaders reaching back to us throughout the years, both to communicate their successes, to tell us what has worked, what has been great, to talk to us about what some of the hurdles and the roadblocks that they've encountered might be, and to get our advice as to whether or not we have recommendations for overcoming those obstacles as they try to move forward with their implementation. We do physically return to a number of communities. Again, we're invited. It tends to happen that maybe a community is very proud of what they've done, is wondering what their next steps are because they've been so effective in implementing the recommendations that we initially left them with. And so they ask us to come back and to see what they've done, to come up with new ideas for them. And so it's a very rare case that we don't stay in pretty close contact with all of our communities. To your point about how do you make sure that those implementation actions are actually taken, that was a very good point, and that is obviously one of the hardest parts about any of this. And that goes back to my statement earlier about the fact that we have found that the most successful project is only as successful as the participation was. Because if you can get people involved with us while we're there, if you can get them investing their time, taking time out of their family life, their professional life, whatever it is, if you can make them feel invested in that process, they are much more reluctant and unhappy about then feeling as though that time was wasted. So if we do get that level of participation, we have found that chances are people are going to be very unwilling to let that plan just sit on a shelf. And we also find that throughout the process, there are natural leaders that sort of evolve throughout the process. And so while there's always a steering committee, a group of folks who help put the project on from the community, oftentimes that body will then evolve throughout the process so that by the end of it, there's an implementation committee. It's not the steering committee for the process anymore. It's an implementation committee. And those are the people who are going to do everything within their power to make sure that that snowball, as Joel put it, just keeps on rolling down the hill and getting momentum so that there are champions on the ground even after the team leaves.
So I'll try to combine my answers to some of these questions. There was a question about the process being voluntary, which it certainly is, and what is the level of government participation. And so when we go to a community on our first visit, there's often a separate meeting with the mayor. The mayor wanted to have, because the elected officials are often very nervous about this. You're going to bring a team of outsiders that, they're not working on a contract with the city, so we have no power over them. They can say anything, right? And they always say, well, my greatest fear is that you're going to raise public expectations that we can't fulfill. And we always have to dissuade them of that fear, because in the end what we do is actually remove their burden to fulfill expectations, because the citizenry and nonprofit organizations, the business sector, all become partners in this, rather than the expectation being, I'm a citizen and I'm a consumer of this from the government, and what is the government doing or not doing? Changes it so that we're all involved in a piece of it and all have a role to play. So there's no financial investment in the process from local government often. I mean, occasionally there's some, they'll put forward some funds to host some of the meetings or whatever it is. But if it is anything, it's modest. We will make recommendations that come out of the process. Some of them certainly will pertain to, land use codes or things that are the municipality's responsibility. But there will also be recommendations for every other component of that community, which brings me to the question about what is a community, and some examples of that. Great question. In some ways, we don't define that as much as the community group itself defines, but when we talk about scale, We've worked in communities that are small rural jurisdictions that have less than 1,000 people, and then we've worked in massive cities that have millions and millions of people. But when we work in a large jurisdiction like Rio or something, then the scale that we are most often looking at is a district or a neighborhood or a few neighborhoods, not the entire city. Because of course, the bigger the scale gets, the less detailed the recommendations get. There's still priorities, but they become more and more abstract, right? So the sort of context or the scale at which we can be most effective is at a neighborhood or district scale. But within that, how we define community is everyone that contributes to creating that place. So not just the residents who live there, but maybe there's someone that owns a business, they don't live in Rio, but they own the business in that neighborhood in Rio. So they're part of the community too. And the nonprofits, and we work with schools and students. So everyone that contributes to that place being what it is part of the community as far as we're concerned. The issue that comes up with some of the relationship with government often as well is sometimes where we're most effective, one of the biggest issues is trust towards government. There is none. So where our process has a ton of value is being able to go to a neighborhood where they're very angry at local government, they have either no relationship or a really bad relationship, and their first reaction to us is, well, who are these outsiders coming into town and why should we trust you? And then when we explain, well, this is a national team of experts that's selected and customized to fit the issues that you say are important in your community, and they're not here to work for a client. They're not from this area. They're not being paid a dime, and they're not here to develop business. They have no agenda or anything that they can get out of this other than their participation in the process by observing, what the issues are and listening to what the community's aspirations and ideas are, is to see something happen. Because no one wants to volunteer their time. This is a lot of work. They work 18, 20-hour days to put this together very rapidly and intensively. So the last thing that we want to do is have that been a waste of their time. So it's all, their sort of reward from it is the community takes action and begins to make progress. And somebody asked about examples. So, I'll do two examples. One of a very small town that worked in, rural setting, only 5,000 residents in a region that is very isolated in our country. So even getting to this community required long hours and hours of driving because there's no other way to access. And they're a rural setting, so agriculture was their heritage. They're still small family farms, but not big industrial farming or anything like that. At the time, they had the worst unemployment in their state. Double-digit unemployment rates. I think it was approaching 20%, which I know, here your unemployment rates, depending on where you are, can go much higher. They can in our urban neighborhoods too. But for this region, it was extraordinarily high. And the first time we went to town, their sort of conversation was nostalgic. Well, we used to be a very vibrant place. We've lost the manufacturing that we had. Now we don't have the jobs, and we're just in decline. So we had a very intensive process with them, and the intent is always to make it more than just a planning exercise, to make it a part of the community and culturally, contextually relate to their experience. So for them, they have a cultural event there in the far north, so there's snow in the winter and it's frigidly cold, and so people stay in and they don't have a lot of social interaction until the spring thaw. And it's a region that also has maple syrup. So they have the first tap from the maple trees, and then they have this big social event where they pour the syrup on, there's still snow on the ground, so they pour it on snow, and it's like this dessert, icy dessert. It's quite good. I've never heard of it. It's quite good. So that was the opening kickoff for our event. Hundreds of people come out, and then it just drove this incredible process where, every meal that I ate in that town was donated by either a restaurant or residents made it for us, It was a very community-oriented process all the way through. And by the time we gave our presentation back to the community on the final evening, they're emotional, they're crying, they feel inspired by what their community is and what it can become. It's not because any of the team members are geniuses, it's really a reflection of what's happened in the process between those citizens. Much more valuable between business people and others, much more valuable than what our team's expertise, which is great, but it's more valuable than that. So what happened, I did not have high hopes for them. I thought, well, if we can get them started on something, at least they can make progress, because they're just so isolated. We went back 2 years later, and they had $250 million in new investment in their little town, and 2,000 new jobs, and it's only a town of 5,000. And I couldn't believe it. But the biggest thing that kind of blew me away was a citizen, one of the same citizens that had been very negative on our first visit, stood up 2 years later and said, the biggest change here has been one of attitude. Now we realize through partnerships, we can do anything. Now nothing is impossible. And that's kind of the civic mindset that had occurred. And they started with, the first thing was they wanted community gardens because they were an agricultural town. And so they turned a parking lot into a community garden, and then a very modest project, and then started creating family plots. And then they started what they call Grow a Neighborhood program, where they're teaching people urban agriculture. Then they started supplying some of their downtown restaurants with fresh produce. Suddenly 6 new restaurants opened, then they have a food festival, then they created a regional tasting center, and then tourists are coming, and it boom, boom, boom. And what happens in all of these jurisdictions when we get to funding is who's going to fund this? What happens in most of these places is it starts with volunteers and donated materials, and it scales upward and outward because you're building momentum and becoming more and more attractive for all the private investment that does exist. So what happens at the end of the day is, sure, they changed their zoning code. So staff worked with citizens on that. That wasn't free. Just very low cost. They did it without hiring consultants. They created a foreign trade zone, investment zone. They did a lot of things, but they were incremental and pieces of it. And what happens is all that private capital that wasn't in the town floods into the town. We see this over and over and over in dozens and dozens of places. So that's one specific example. I can obviously talk all night about examples. We do go back to communities, and it's the favorite part of the job because you can see not just the physical transformation, but what citizens say. I'll turn things. Oh, there was one question that I'll answer about length of time. Someone said, you mentioned it's only a few days when you're in the ground, but it could be a year and a half. What happens is we work on an annual sort of schedule. So we get a new round of applications normally. They can apply anytime, but we have one program vehicle where they apply at the end of the year. So we start in January. And from the time that we do the first visit to the community, we'll find someone like Wayne to say, hey, will you be a team leader for this project? And then we'll go visit. To the time that they have the process is normally somewhere between 6 weeks and 3 months. In some communities, they want to have it later in the year because it is attached to a big event or back to school or something like that. And so it'll be further off, but it can happen very quickly, and we have mobilized very quickly. So it's not a long-term process except for the implementation from the community, which, as they mentioned, communities refer back to these plans 30 years, 40 years later still, as sort of, this is the vision that cast us off. And before I turn it over to Wayne to talk about urban planning and professional universities, the relatable point about this culturally, because all of our cities are facing such similar issues, a lot of our processes, to the point about the processes that are similar here, is that these can often work in other settings if they're culturally sensitive to whatever that local context is, not just national, but whatever that city's culture is. So for us in the United States, in Porto Alegre in the late 1980s, they started doing participatory budgeting. And this is now you spread it all over the world because you can do this in any city where people are wanting to participate in the decision-making process around budgets. So we finally, in the United States, very slowly, just in the last couple of years, some of our big municipalities have started doing this, and I think it's the greatest creation that these cities' mayors are so innovative. They didn't know that you guys have been doing it for over 2 decades. But the point is that the sort of cultural setting might be totally different, but the desire for public participation in that decision-making process and the impact that it can have is universal.
So I just want to do 2 comments. One is in terms of this covers a few different questions, but in terms of that community trust issue that Joel talked about and the resources that one or 2 people asked. Joel's right that part of the reason you're getting resources appear is when there's a very strong political consensus in the community. It makes it easier to do that. I mean, most communities, I've worked in some desperately poor communities, most communities have some resources. It's really a question of how you're prioritizing those resources. And so the more the community is engaged, the stronger the sort of justification for some of those things. And of course, some things have very low budgets. If you're redoing a street, often, I use my example of streets being pedestrian friendly, if you're spending money anyway to rebuild the street, in its life cycle, doing it right isn't necessarily more expensive than not doing it right. The one thing I will add, though, is I do think this is one of the areas where the process is really important that the team knows what they're doing. Because you could certainly imagine a team of people who have had no experience, who hear some community comments, who are going to, sort of divide the community together. The point of these processes is to build consensus and to bring the community together. And so all of your cities have some very hot button issues. And we never want to ignore those issues, but we also sort of want to think about how do those things really get done. So for example, there's often an economist who can actually do a pro forma for a project. So when the team says, here's a private investment that might work, hopefully the numbers are real. Again, there's a limit to how far you can do in 3 days, but at least they're grounded in reality, so we're not just saying things that don't make sense. And the majority of projects, certainly not all of them, but the majority of the projects are sponsored by the municipality. They're the ones who ask the team to come in. And so again, understanding the political realities is part of this. And understanding it both ways, frankly. Understanding, what's important, what's doable, but also, at least in the United States, we've seen great plans that a mayor embraces, and when that mayor leaves, the next mayor will distance himself as much as possible. So we want to understand the politics, but at times that's sort of a way to stay there. And then the more technical question about planners in the United States and training. So with one exception, New Jersey, planners aren't legally licensed. So employers can hire whoever they want. The typical degree is a 2-year postgraduate degree, master's in city planning, master's in regional planning. There's an accreditation board, planning accreditation board, that approves, makes sure that that program has met the criteria for what should be a basic planner. And there's a test, American Institute for Certified Planners, that majority of planners take. But that said, so the master's degree is generally the entry-level degree for planners, and the majority of planners have this AICP exam. But it's not required. Some employers will only hire AICP. Many won't do that. There are some, not many, but there's some undergraduate degrees, 4-year degrees in the States. Particularly for larger cities, tends to be sort of an entry-level planner job. And then many cities hire someone with a totally different background. And obviously, the hotter the market is, the city can hire whoever they want. They tend to hire 4-year planners. Some cities don't do that.
Obrigado, Wayne. Bom, mais alguma pergunta? Andréa. Eu também tinha uma pergunta, quer dizer, a demanda, pelo que eu estou entendendo, inicial, parte de uma prefeitura, de uma municipalidade, não? A demanda inicial, a primeira demanda, parte de um prefeito ou de uma municipalidade, não é isso? Não? É a iniciativa iniciativa do Instituto, da AIA, como que se escolhe a cidade ou a comunidade? Né? Essa é a minha pergunta. E também acho que a questão que a Vera colocou, quer dizer, há uma diferença na formação americana entre o arquiteto e, pelo que vocês falaram também, há um conselho diferente, há um conselho de urbanismo, né? Que é diferente do conselho de arquitetura. André, desculpe.
Não, imagina, boa a sua pergunta. Era nessa linha mesmo que eu queria saber, mas também gostaria de saber se vocês têm alguma publicação onde vocês apresentam alguns exemplos de trabalhos bem-sucedidos, se isso existe, se eles podem divulgar para nós.
Moral question? No. Okay. Excuse me.
Boa noite, meu nome é Mariana, eu sou arquiteta. Eu queria saber se existe algum tipo de treinamento para essa equipe multidisciplinar ou se eles aprendem na prática mesmo.
Obrigado. Eu gostaria também de anunciar a presença do presidente do CAU-RJ, que eu havia me esquecido, Jerônimo Moraes, né? Está aqui.
I can go ahead and sort of clarify the point about the applicants. We don't put a restriction on who can apply for a project with us. Oftentimes it will come from the city government, the city planning staff, someone like that within the planning services. Sometimes it is the mayor's initiative. He says, I'd really like for you to pursue this, and he has his staff pursue it. But we also get applicants from nonprofits within the community, from neighborhood groups perhaps, from sort of loosely organized neighborhoods or community groups. We have received applicants from universities, local universities and colleges. So we don't actually say only this type of group can apply for the project, but what we do is, again, it's so important to have a broad base of support. And so what we ask in the application process is that they demonstrate that they have a steering committee, and that steering committee is made up of more than just one group. So for example, if it is the city planning staff that put together the application, that steering committee should have a representative from the city planning staff, but it also needs to have representatives from the local university, from the local neighborhood groups, from the local nonprofits who really work in that neighborhood. Again, as broad-based as possible, because by having that broad base, we can ensure that there's going to be much better participation throughout the entire process. And so, again, it is in fact an application process. We have two programs under the Design Systems Team umbrella. Both of the programs require that a community that's interested in participating put together an application for us and submit it to us so we can review it and work with them to make sure that it's appropriate. I'll also tackle the idea of our resources. We do have a website that has every single report that's ever come out of one of our processes. And so there's well over 200 PDF documents up on that website. It has also the PowerPoint presentations of the past 10 years for basically as long as we've been doing PowerPoint with these processes. And so we do have those documents. The problem is that the AIA has a really bad website, and so it is very difficult to find them. But certainly if you were to Google AIA SDAT, so AIA SDAT, you would be able to find all those resources. You could also Google AIA RUDAT, which is AIA RUDAT. And again, all of those, unfortunately in English, apologies, All of those resources would be available for you to take a look at and see what the typical report and what the typical results and recommendations of the projects would be.
One additional note on that point. We were in Porto Alegre in December to do a 2-day training workshop on the process with local officials and the design community. And then we gave a lecture at the university there that was videotaped. And so they are going to translate that, and that'll be available. We spent an hour, I think, talking, or almost an hour with slides, so lots of visual images of the success stories. We also are producing online films that you can find on YouTube, and there's a nice little translation app that is okay. It's not perfect, but you can sort of kind of understand what's going on in films and again visually see what's happening as we go back to communities where we had a process, and you can see visually all the new buildings. One point about how we choose a community, or why, you might be thinking, why would the AIA invest resources in something that's just a public service program? And we certainly do it because of what the organization stands for and its mission in communities. But it has a nice little benefit in that, just in the last 5 years, I don't remember how many communities we've worked with in that time, but we've generated well over $1 billion in new investment in those communities collectively. And so what happens is they start implementing and they build momentum, and investment becomes possible because they have a report that a group of unbiased outsiders put together, and they can take that to various funders, or the private sector looks at it and says, oh, this is a good investment because the economist has penciled out kind of how that would look for me. And so all that money starts to become available for implementation. But what happens locally is, when we work in the United States, who gets those jobs? There's a lot of projects for designers and architects. So I'll get emails from our local members, right? They love this, right? So they'll say, thanks so much for the project you did in this town, because I got the $1 million master plan on their waterfront, and so I think of it as our secret economic development strategy for our members, because it does generate a lot of jobs indirectly. It's not the point. We don't go to the community saying hire more architects or anything like that. Our goal is to see the community be a success, but it is a nice fringe benefit for sure. About the special training, I mentioned that we had a training in December. Most of the time, because we every year have about 50% of our volunteers are new to our program, and 50% have been involved previously. So a lot of it's hands-on, but what we're doing, especially with our younger members, is specifically doing training on the process and on public participation more generally, so that they develop those skills moving into their careers. Something that's happened because the program's been around for 50 years is it's been either replicated or adapted many times. So, for instance, our state and our local chapters, we have chapters all over the country. At the local level, it's over 350. So a lot of them created their own design assistance program at the local level. They don't form a national team. They use their local talent, but for that process, they are serving as volunteers and not taking business as a result of it. So it may look a little bit different. It's not the same kind of expertise in terms of the interdisciplinary nature or being able to bring people from so far outside of the community, but they'll often partner with the local chapters of planners or engineers to put something together that, at least in terms of the public interface, feels very similar, so it can have the same kind of catalytic impact. But so universities have replicated the process, but use students. Firms have created a version of the process, but they're charging for it. And so design firms have created it. Our military, U.S. Air Force, created a version of it to do base planning. And then about 25 years ago, both Canada and the UK adapted processes with the UK. We had a special event that took place in the late 1980s in an industrial city because Prince Charles at the time was very concerned about the post-industrial cities in England, and so he came to the United Stacy chaired this major event that took place. But we had a project outside of that city with a binational team, so half British, half American, and the British professionals said we need to do this back in the UK. And so they did it hundreds of times in the UK, and then they took it to other places in Europe, and so they've been in Russia with it, they've been in Lebanon, and other places, and it works in adapted forms in all those places, depending on what the situational realities are.
Just very quickly for the training again in the United States, for architects, there's a similar process. I forgot the name of the group. There's accredits architecture programs. Most architects are doing it's an extended undergraduate program, so they're doing the U.S. undergraduate degrees usually 4 years. They do a 4+1 or 4+2. There are some master's programs that people do as well. Unlike planners, architects are legally required to be certified, so there's a licensure process. And so what happens is you have some jobs that are clearly jobs that are overwhelmingly filled by people who come through planning programs, typically municipal planners. And then you have jobs that are filled only by architects designing buildings. And then there's a point where the careers sort of come together. So in your people's 20s and 30s, they often are in one field or another. But then when you're dealing with, bigger scale urban issues, those are issues with a lot of overlap. I mean, some architects who never leave buildings, some planners who never leave whatever they do. But, a lot of projects are done together, and the best of them are usually done collaboratively. And that doesn't lead, when you're doing other than a building, doesn't need to be a licensed for either.
Obrigado, Wayne. Bom, eu acho que, dado o avançado da hora, podemos terminar. E eu acho que fica uma mensagem aqui, que eu acho que é uma mensagem importante, de que o projeto e o plano são, na verdade, também captores de recursos, e fazê-los, muitas vezes, abre a possibilidade. E essa questão da organização física, do espaço físico, ela pode ser um profundo catalisador exatamente de mudanças, melhoria de vida, melhoria de emprego, melhoria de uma série de condições. Eu gostaria de agradecer a todos, agradecer a AIA pela presença e agradecer ao Wayne e pediria uma salva de palmas para todos nós. Obrigado. Boa noite.